Good evening. Good evening. A little bit late tonight. Had a very busy day. Generally, we're trying to be as steady as we can with this 6 p.m. Pacific time. And that would be Sunday through Thursday. You can count, usually the Fridays will be at noon Pacific. And Saturday night is always going to be, about 45 minutes after Shabbat ends in LA. It's biting off a lot to do a 30 to 45 minute live show every day, 7 days a week for 7.5 years, but that's what I'm attempting to do. And to share with you the beautiful teachings of our sages in the Talmud, and to add my 2 cents, to clarify, or occasionally to share my own thoughts as a commentary. And with your support and encouragement, God willing, and especially with God's help, perhaps I'll be able to do this, to make a commentary every day for 7.5 years. That is the goal. But in terms of the schedule, usually at 6 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, Pacific time, noon on Friday, and about 45 minutes after Shabbat ends on Saturday night. Let's see who is with us now. Okay, beautiful. Lynn Portnoy says hi. Shelly Kennedy says Lila Tov. Tom Beck says shalom. Stephanie Pink Mama Frieden, hello from Herndon, Virginia. Tracy Garcia, top fan. I think you get the top fan badge when you're here all the time and comment. So get that top fan badge. Another one is James Roth from Indianapolis. Allison Lang says hi from down under in Australia. So good to have you with us. Let me get the YouTube in front of me as well. Beautiful. Okay, who else is here? Pauline Michael says shalom from Arkansas. David Bushway from Rhode Island. Janice says thank you so much for your dedication. And Parker Ansley Jones says Lila Tov. Great to have you all with me. Okay, so we've talked about in the past that our sages, they're going to go there. They're going to go to every nook and cranny of human endeavor, human enterprise, human activity, for many reasons, primarily because, God sent us into this world. We are all souls. We come from the world of souls. God sent us here for a mission. The mission is sometimes clear to us, sometimes unclear. But whether we're directly involved in the work of our mission or just living, according to our sages, we want to live here according to God's will, right? We want to perceive and act on the world according to God's will. Now, sometimes acting according to God's will simply means staying safe and keeping others safe. So where the sages see a place where, it's a matter of safety, and, people may not be aware of some things that they can do for themselves to keep themselves healthy and safe and to do for others, they're going to inform us. And today we're going to have some examples of that. We're going to be talking about some private matters for people that people don't usually talk about, but our sages go there for the sake of the population so that everyone should know the right and good and safe way to do these kinds of things. So we'll get to that momentarily. Where are we? We're in Tractate 2, the second volume of the Talmud, Masechet Shabbos. Today we're going to finish chapter 8, and I'm very excited because that means we're going to finish this volume, which is part 1 of Tractate Shabbos in the Koran Talmud. We're going to finish it today. And with tomorrow, when we pick it up on page 82, we're going to start volume 2. That's an arbitrary division. Shabbos is such a big volume, 150 pages, that it had to be divided into, they're not separate volumes of the Talmud. They're just part 1 and part 2 in the Koran publication. In the Art Scroll, there's actually 4 volumes to do the 150 pages of Shabbos. Now we're moving from volume 1 to volume 2. More importantly, in terms of all publications of the Talmud. We're finishing chapter 8 today, which means we're going to finish our discussion of Mishnah number 4 and start and end the 5th Mishnah of chapter 8, which is going to allow us to finish chapter 8. We have been talking about minimum measures of objects that make those objects significant enough so that if we carry them out from the private domain to the public domain on Shabbos, and we do so unwittingly, we're going to become liable to bring a sin offering when the Holy Temple is standing in Jerusalem. When there's no temple, but we do these things unwittingly, and then we realize we did it, and we say, oh, I committed a sin. I can't bring a sin offering, but I can resolve to educate myself better, to be more careful, to take my relationship with God a little more seriously so I don't make this mistake again, to get a little bit more organized, to learn these rules better. And that's the kind of teshuvah, atonement, that we make when we don't have a temple, when we could bring the sin offering. But more importantly, as we said yesterday, not more importantly, but as we said yesterday, when we study these minimum measures, it helps us to understand the nature of the law, the underlying philosophy of the law, and it communicates this idea that, to be a righteous person is not easy, and it requires a certain degree of meticulousness and examining our deeds. For sure, we're going to make mistakes. We may make many mistakes. That's just part of the process of being a person of faith and trying to lift ourselves up and do a little better every day. Okay, so we're talking about minimum measures, and here in Mishnah number 4, which we're starting today, right? This is on page 81. Did we do something before? No, see, we start page 81 with Mishnah number 4. Okay. So a minimum measure for bone. If somebody is carrying a piece of bone, how big does that bone have to be considered significant, as if he really is carrying? If it's smaller than the minimum measure, it's like he's not carrying anything. It's not significant. He didn't do anything. So for a bone, the minimum measure is enough to turn it into a spoon. Enough to fashion a spoon from this piece of bone is how big this bone would be to be significant. Rabbi Yehuda says enough bone to make a key out of it. How much glass what's the minimum measure for carrying glass? Enough to scrape the top of a little rod that makes a bobbin. So a bobbin is something that a weaver uses. I guess this instrument, the bobbin, needs to be rounded off. And you can use a piece of broken glass, because it would have a sharp edge, to sort of scrape off and round off the end of this wooden rod so that it would be smooth and not get snagged on the threads, I guess, of the warp or the woof when one is weaving. What about a pebble or a stone? A pebble or a stone is considered significant if it's large enough when you throw it at a bird, so that the bird will sort of fly off, right? So maybe you're afraid of, perhaps a predatory bird, or a bird that for some reason has become a nuisance, and you just want to throw a little stone toward the bird to make it fly off. A stone that's big enough to do that is considered significant. But Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, no, that's too small. That really isn't significant. That's a pebble. A stone, in order for it to be significant enough to make you liable to bring a sin offering for carrying it out on Shabbos, has to be big enough for you to throw it at a dog or a sheep. You're not trying to hurt the dog or the sheep. It's just a tiny little stone, but it's enough so that he feels it and it scampers away. It's not going to eat your vegetables or molest your little children. Enough to just make it go away, not to hurt it. Okay, and so we see there that in 2 of these measures, there was a little bit of a conflict on the bone. The rabbis say a spoon. Rabbi Yehuda says enough to make a key. And with regard to the pebble or stone, the rabbis say enough to chase a bird away. And Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says enough to chase an animal away. Now we move into the Gemara, the commentary on this Mishnah number 4. The first question that's asked, is Rabbi Yehuda's measure greater. So when we were discussing a piece of bone, the rabbi said enough to make a spoon. Rabbi Yehuda said enough to make a key. Now, a key in Talmudic times is not like a little brass thing on your key ring. A key back then was pretty substantial, right? Look at this thing. It's like big. That's the knob at the top of it. That's a handle. Their hardware was much clumsier than ours. And so this key is like quite a substantial object, quite a bit larger than a spoon. So the Gemara is asking, are you saying that Rabbi Yehuda's minimum measure is larger than that of the rabbis? Why is that question being asked? Because generally speaking, Rabbi Yehuda is more stringent than the rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda holds us to a higher standard, and so therefore when we're talking about a minimum measure to make someone liable, we can expect that Rabbi Yehuda will suggest something that is smaller than everybody else and is going to make us liable in an even smaller amount. And the answer comes, you're right, Rabbi Yehuda's measure is more stringent. That object is smaller. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda is talking about the teeth of the key and not the entire key. Takeaway there, Rabbi Yehuda is more strict than his colleagues. Moving on. Okay, with regard to the stone, right? What is the minimum size of a stone that's going to make us liable to bring a sin offering for carrying it out on Shabbos? The rabbi said it enough to just chase away a bird. Elazar ben Yaakov says enough to chase away an animal. You throw it at an animal and it's going to scamper away. And they ask, well, how big is that? And the answer comes back, it's a stone that weighs as much as 10 zuz. How much is that? I mean, 10 zuz, I don't know if there was a coin worth 10 zuz or if they meant 10 zuz coins. A zuz is an amount of money, it's a coin. So perhaps it means as much as 10 coins. So it's a little bit more sizable, right? 10 coins. I mean, it's going to be something like that, I suppose. And indeed, the halacha, the law, is with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov here, even though he was in the minority at the time that the Mishnah was set down. The law in this matter follows Elazar ben Yaakov to carry out a stone. It's enough of a stone that you could toss it at a dog or a sheep and it would go off. You wouldn't hurt it, but it would just be, it would notice that you threw it and it would leave. All right, and now that we're talking about stones, right, apropos the subject of stones, Zunin asks, stones for the bathroom, what is their measure? So this presupposes that we understand that in Talmudic times, so they didn't have this precious commodity that people were rushing to Costco and their supermarkets to stock up on at the beginning of the pandemic. No, my friends, 2,000 years ago, and I'm sure for many centuries before that, people were not using toilet paper. What did they use in place of toilet paper? They used various different things. Including, in some cultures and times where there was water available so that you could wash afterward, then people might even use the left hand. But where that was not practicable, and where there was a desert and where water is precious and it wasn't so easy to get water so you could really wash properly after you'd been to the bathroom, so they would use rocks. They would use small stones to do the job of toilet paper. Therefore, stones, which we've been talking about how big a stone does it have to be for you to carry it outside on Shabbos. But there's an additional aspect to this, which is that stones lying on the ground are muktzah on Shabbos. They have no purpose on Shabbos unless they're set aside to be used on Shabbos. So a stone that's just lying on the ground is considered not to have a Shabbos purpose, and that way, and therefore, we don't pick it up, we don't touch it. The muktzah principle is a fence around the Torah that keeps us from coming to violate Shabbos in other ways. However, even a stone that you didn't prepare for Shabbos by saying, I'm going to use these stones if I need to go to the bathroom on Shabbos, But now you have a need, you're going to go to the bathroom, you're going to need, you don't have toilet paper in that 20 centuries ago. So you're going to need some stones to do that job. So this is going to override the muktzah prohibition. You're going to be allowed to pick up these stones and use them to clean yourself after going to the bathroom. Zunin is asking, well, how big should those stones be? What is the limitation? Now we're not talking about a minimum measure, we're talking about a maximum measure. How big can that stone be? How big should that stone be? So the sages answer him, oh, well, there's actually different opinions. So-and-so says the size of an olive, so-and-so says the size of a nut, and somebody else says the size of an egg. And Zunin challenges the sages because he knows that this is the prevailing measures that people have come up and that some hold one way and some hold the other. Is it the size of a nut? Is it the size of an olive? Is it the size of an egg? And Zunin challenges all of them and he says, are we really going to make people take a scale into the bathroom, right? A scale to compare the sizes of these stones? I mean, he's talking about weight. We've been talking about volume. But his point is, to somebody really who's got to go to the bathroom, who's got to go fast, who's going to need those stones to do what he needs to do, does this guy have to think about, wait a minute, what was the size? Whose jurisdiction am I in? Is it over here that the authority locally says that an olive-sized stone, but if I'm over there, it can be an egg-sized stone, etc. We don't want to make people go through that. So he made such a compelling argument that the sages who were in the study hall that day counted themselves, meaning they wanted to see if there were enough people present to constitute a majority so that they could issue a ruling that would last. And there were enough people there that day, and they said, Zunin is right. When you need to go to the bathroom, you could take a handful of stones. Whatever you need, you take it. We're not going to worry. What is the minimum or the maximum measure? Just take what you need. And that is the halakha. That is the law. You take what you need, a handful of stones. And we're all glad to hear that. Okay. Then, since we're on the subject of cleaning oneself after going to the bathroom, number 2, so then we hear some more advice from the sages about avoiding problems. So there are 10 things that bring a person to suffer from hemorrhoids. And they are one who eats the leaves of bulrushes, grape leaves, tendrils of grapevines, the palate and tongue of an animal, as well as any other part of the animal which is not smooth and which has protrusions, without salt, the spine of a fish, a salty fish that is not fully cooked, and one who drinks the dregs of wine, and one who cleans himself with lime and clay, which are the materials from which earthenware is made, and one who cleans himself with a stone which another person has cleaned, with which another person has cleaned himself. And some say one who suspends himself in the bathroom as well, meaning somebody who stays there too long. Apparently, using a previously used stone is dangerous to one's health. Thank God we live in a time where we generally don't have to face these issues. We live in a time with toilet paper. But my friends, who knows? One day we may find ourselves on a camping trip and nothing is available, and we have to come to use a stone. So let's remember to make sure we use a stone that nobody else has used. Enough said. Okay. Enough said about that. All right, that is on the subject of 10 things that we want to avoid doing or eating because it can create problems downstairs. Now, Rav Hisda says great is human dignity because it overrides a Torah prohibition. What is he talking about? Some people would, when they needed to go to the bathroom number 2 in Talmudic times, instead of walking all the way out of town to an open, area in the woods that was private and away from the tents or the buildings or the courtyards or anything, they would go up to the roof of their house, a private place on the roof and outside. Perhaps they have a pot up there and, they'll get rid of that after Shabbos. So if they're going to go upstairs and they're going to take stones with them, the question is asked, well, now he's carrying stones up the stairs on Shabbos. It's not a question of going from one domain to another, but it's an extra effort to take these stones up to the roof, which maybe violates a Shabbos prohibition on doing extra work. And the answer is you go ahead and do it because this is a matter of human dignity and you take the stones that you need even if you're taking them to the roof. And so Rav Hisda says great is human dignity because it even overrides a Torah prohibition. Rav Huna objected to this and it said, well, we've learned elsewhere that on Shabbos, if you had some food between your teeth, you cannot pick up a twig from the ground to pick your teeth with it, right? Because the twig on the ground is like pebbles and stones on the ground. It's muktzah. It's not prepared for Shabbos. People didn't expect to be using it for Shabbos. It just lies on the ground. We don't pick up stones and twigs on Shabbos. So Rav Huna is saying, well, if human dignity overrides a Torah prohibition, then why can't we just pick up that twig so that we can, clean the food from between our teeth? And Hisda answers, yeah, that is not really a matter of human dignity. You just have something between your teeth. And truthfully, you could have prepared yourself. You knew where you were going to be eating on Shabbos. And if you're a person who needs toothpicks, so you should have brought in some twigs to have your toothpicks on Shabbos. But when it comes to going to the bathroom, it's a much more critical type of activity. You can't predict when and where you're going to be, when you need to go. So if you need to go somewhere and carry them from one, up to the roof or to whatever your private spot is going to be, and you need to take your handful of stones there, you do it. You just do it and you don't worry about it. And then the question comes up, may a person do his business, number 2, in a plowed field on Shabbos? Right? So we say the answer is no, you can't do that on Shabbos because it's a plowed field. After you do your thing, you may move some dirt to cover it up. You should cover it up. And then you would be filling in a hole since it was plowed and now there's like a furrow there. And now you're going to move some dirt. You might come to be filling in a hole. Not the hole that you made or just to cover up your filth, that's okay. But since the field was plowed and now you're going to move some dirt there, even just walking through that plowed field, you're going to maybe move some dirt to fill some holes. So we don't go, number 2, in a plowed field on Shabbos because of that. During the week, we can go to the bathroom, number 2, in our own plowed field, but you cannot do that in somebody else's plowed field. Not because of the Shabbos prohibition on filling in a hole, but simply because you may damage his field. And, it shouldn't need to be said, but we don't go, number 2, in somebody else's plowed field. That's the law. And then we come to the question of, may one use to do this, the cleaning that toilet paper would normally do, may one use an earthenware shard, right? So you can imagine a clay pot that you plant, like flowers in, the clay pot, and it breaks, right? So a shard of earthenware, a shard from a clay pot, may one use that? And I'll just read to you what it says. Rabbi Yochanan said it is prohibited to wipe with an earthenware shard on Shabbat. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for that prohibition? If you say that it is due to the danger that he might injure himself with the sharp edge of that pottery shard, of that earthenware shard, well, that prohibition should be on weekdays too. If we're worried that he's going to hurt himself, then why is Shabbat any different than the weekdays? Rather, it is due to the fact that it invites witchcraft. If so, he should also not do that on weekdays. If it invites witchcraft on Shabbos, it would invite witchcraft during the week. That's not a reason. So then somebody says, rather, the concern is lest he remove hairs, right? So a person, on their bottom has some hairs, and if you scrape with an earthenware shard, you might remove some hairs while you're just cleaning yourself with the shard. But that is not going to be prohibited on Shabbos because your intent is to clean yourself. If some hairs get pulled out, you're not doing the prohibited work of shaving on Shabbos. That would be an unintended consequence, an unintentional result of a permitted activity, and you wouldn't be liable for that. So that's not the reason. So they couldn't figure out the reason that Rabbi Yochanan said you're prohibited to wipe with an earthenware shard on Shabbos. So Rav Natan bar Oshaya said to those who raised the question, a great man said something. We need to find a reason. He said that. It wasn't explained, but we're not going to overlook it. We know that Rabbi Yochanan is such a great sage, and we had a discussion here just a week or two ago, right? Meet the Mensch series on Rabbi Yochanan, and he's really one of the great rabbis of all time. The chief rabbi in Israel, or with the status of the chief rabbi and the head of his yeshiva for 80 years. So if Rabbi Yochanan said this, there must be some deep wisdom behind it. And so Rav Natan bar Oshaya really searched for that wisdom, and he figured it out. He said, let us say the reason for it. And he explains Rabbi Yochanan's statement as follows. It is not necessary to say that it is prohibited on a weekday for the aforementioned reasons, because you could hurt yourself, because it invites witchcraft. So of course you can't do it on a weekday, and you can't do it on Shabbos either. But why is he saying you can't do it on Shabbos? And the reason is because on Shabbos, he might have the option of using a stone. However, with regard to Shabbos, we have said that since the shard has the status of utensil and is not set aside, he may well use it as it is preferable to a stone which is set aside. In other words, the shard of earthenware, if it's large enough, and we're going to cover this in the next Mishnah, number 5, if it's large enough to hold a quarter lug of water, so then it's a significant object, and you can use it on Shabbos to measure a quarter lug of water. If you need to know how much water you're going to use for something, let's say to wash your hands, you can use the shard for that. So it is prepared for Shabbos. The stone on the ground is not prepared for Shabbos. So a person might think, well, even though the pottery shard is a little bit sharp and might cause me some pain, it at least is prepared for Shabbos. The stone on the ground is not, and it might be better, therefore, to use the shard on Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan came to say, even on Shabbos, we don't use the shard. Even if we're going to use something that would otherwise be muktzah, the stone, we use it, and we don't take the risk of hurting ourselves with the earthenware shard. And that is what Rav Natan came to simply by trusting. The other people couldn't figure it out, and they were just going to let it go. But he said, no, if Rabbi Yochanan said it, there must be a good reason. And he kept digging until he figured it out. And sure enough, the sage had a beautiful and wise reason for his ruling, and it just needed to be pried out. That, whenever we encounter teachings that seem to make no sense to us, it seems like, oh, that's from another age, that's silly, and we might be tempted to chuckle, at these sages and their wisdom from 2,000 years ago. We should take this lesson from Rav Natan bar Oshaya and say, no, a great man said it. There must be wisdom there. Let's see if we can figure it out. Good. And then Rav Huna said to his son Rabba, why don't you go study with Rav Hisda? So Rabba ends up being one of the great sages in Babylonia. His father, Rav Huna, is saying to him when he's young, why aren't you in the academy and in the classes of Rav Hisda? You should be learning from him. So Rabba says to his father, Rav Huna, every time I go to learn from him, he just talks about mundane matters, like whether or not you can use a shard of earthenware to clean yourself. And Rav Huna sort of sits up, looks at his son, right, who's not called Rabba yet. He's going to eventually be the great sage Rabba, but now he's young. And Rav Huna looks at his son and he says, Rav Hisda is telling you about how you clean yourself and how you avoid hurting yourself. He is talking about matters that are crucial to human life. And you're telling me that you don't want to go listen to him because he's talking about mundane things? You go listen to him right now. And all the more so because he's teaching you practical lessons about guarding your health and guarding your body's well-being. This is not mundane. This is crucial life wisdom. These matters are important. And just because we don't like to talk about it, just seems, it's grungy. So we don't talk about it most of the time. But from time to time, like today, we study these matters because they are crucial to human life. Okay, very good. On the same subject, I'll just say quickly, this is because we're not going to talk about these things for a while after this, so let's just get all these bits of advice out on the table. So, one who needs to go, number 2, and he's unable to do so, Rav Hisda said he should stand and sit, stand and sit. Rav Huna from Nehardea said he should move to the sides and attempt to relieve himself in another spot. Rav Hamnuna said he should manipulate with a stone in that place to sort of stimulate the colon to make everything move. And the rabbi said he should divert his thoughts to other matters. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, why would I divert my thoughts to something else? What I want to do is go. If I start thinking about other things, I'll forget what it is that I wanted to do, which was to evacuate. So Rav Ashi said to him, no. He should divert his thoughts away from all other matters and focus specifically on, I need to go. I'm just going to think about, I'd like to go. I'd like to go. I'd like to go. And focus exclusively on the effort to relieve himself. But remember, we also learned earlier, don't strain. You don't strain, you just focus on the fact that everything's moving through you. Rav Yirmiyah from Difti said, I saw a certain Arab who stood and sat until it came out of him like one pouring out the contents of a pot. So apparently the first advice from Rav Hisda is effective. One should stand and sit, if he needs to go and just can't get it moving. And that's the end of our discussion of the 4th Mishnah. And then we have one more Mishnah, very short, and its Gemara is equally short, and that will finish chapter 8 for us today. The 5th Mishnah of chapter 8 is what is the minimum measure for earthenware, right? So for pieces of clay pottery, pieces of earthenware, what is the minimum measure that will make you liable if you carry it on Shabbos? And we're going to have 3 opinions. Rabbi Yehuda says enough to put between beams of wood. You can imagine wood that's just been cut to make lumber. And you can put little bits of little shards of pottery, broken shards of pottery, between the beams, between the boards, so that air can circulate between the fresh cut lumber and help it to dry out. If you've ever seen wood stacked, you will often see that there are spaces between the boards. Rabbi Yehuda says that's the minimum measure. Rabbi Meir says enough to stoke a fire with it. And Rabbi Yosei says enough to hold a quarter lug of water. As we learned a couple days ago, a quarter lug is about the volume of an egg and a half. And the halacha follows Rabbi Yosei. In disputes with his colleagues, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosei is the one that we listen to. So the minimum measure that makes you liable, if you unwittingly carry it out on Shabbos, makes you liable to bring a sin offering, is enough of a clay shard that it can hold a quarter lug of water. And that finishes chapter 8 for us. I'm going to scan the comments to see if there are any questions I can answer. I'm actually quite excited because after our class ends today, my son and I are going to go to a backyard minyan. This is going to be the first time I'm praying with a minyan in 3 months. You know, very cautious social distancing is going to be observed. We're all going to wear masks. We're not going to schmooze and chat, nothing. We're just going to walk in. We're going to pray. We're going to stay 6 feet apart. We're going to do it outside in a backyard, and then we're going to leave. But we're going to say Kaddish, or enable a mourner to say Kaddish. And I mean, I haven't said Kaddish, you know, even the regular Kaddishes of the service, or being there for a mourner to say Kaddish in over 3 months. I've been praying just with my son in our home for the last 3 months. So we're pretty excited that tonight we're going to go say Mincha Mariv with a minyan in a backyard. Okay. So some comments here. Allison Lang says, human endeavor will triumph over the Chardonnay socialists and those who find the dogma of communism fashionable, in my opinion. I'm not sure what that has to do with today's page. So I'm just looking for questions about what we discussed today. Okay, Cheryl Lanther says, oh wow, I was thinking a big skeleton key for the piece of bone that becomes a key. Good one, Cheryl. I like that. Allison says, coffee is bad for hemorrhoids. Thank you, Allison. I wasn't aware of that. That's good. Good to share. And Christopher Holroyd says, this is interesting in a scatological way. And listen, you know, we all have this in common. Everybody eats and everybody... There's a book that we read to our kids when they were little, right? Everybody poops. And little kids love that book. And as we get older, okay, so we don't talk about this stuff. But because we're refined and we don't talk about this stuff, you know, people end up just figuring it out on their own. And maybe if they would have heard, you know, some piece of advice from somebody else, but we never talk about it, and then they end up getting themselves into, you know, into health problems, health issues. I mean, luckily now, when people have questions about this, they can very privately and discreetly look it up on the internet. Don't believe everything you read on the internet, but at least there's sources of information. And if you go to a trusted website, great. But for centuries, that kind of thing was not available. So it is important that people could look up the answers to these questions and hear it from respected authorities. Okay, and as Tom Beck says, this too is Torah. Exactly right, Tom. This too is Torah. And we just got that, right? Rav Huna said to his son, Rabba, who didn't want to learn this stuff, didn't want to hear this stuff from Rav Hisda, that these are matters which are crucial to life, and therefore they are very much matters of Torah. That's it, my friends. It's great to be with you. Tomorrow is probably going to be a little bit later because I have an appointment in the late afternoon tomorrow. So I suspect we'll be going at about 7:30 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow, which will be Wednesday. And then on Thursday, Shavuos starts Thursday evening. So we certainly will be going earlier than that. But probably it's going to be around the normal time, the 6 p.m. Pacific on Thursday. You can count. I'll say more about that tomorrow. And during the day on Thursday, I believe it's going to be 10 a.m. Pacific. We'll do our annual reading of the Book of Ruth, which is traditionally read on the holiday of Shavuos, which begins Thursday night. That's what I've got for us. Sending you all big hug, big love from Los Angeles. Take care, my holy brothers and sisters.